in general, and this is very generalized. So across the different cultures of the Near East, this is going to shift and change depending on where you are geographically, right? But on the whole, there are some shared ideas and characteristics across the geography of the Near East, and in the text that we have, names are different, gods are different. To even different levels to the structures of deities within the Near East. But if we were to hone in on the Northwest Semitic world, where we have ancient Israel. We have this idea of a divine council that somewhat mirrors the political systems going on the earth. And what I mean by that is, and what Handy I think really gets at, is that there is this idea that the humans understood the divine realm to have a sort of bureaucratic system, and it dealt with anything from authority to hierarchy to different roles within the council, different divine beings playing different roles within the council. With, from an ancient Israelite perspective, for example, Yahweh at the head of the council. In the Northwest Semitic pantheon, the chief god El was thought to be at the head of the council. And then you had, of course, like the 70 sons of El, who were also part of that council as well. So in this perspective, then, what we have is, within the Hebrew Bible, a sort of heavenly bureaucracy that makes decisions both for heaven and for earth, in the governmental and governing system of creation, if you will. So we see this often in the prophets. There are plenty of examples, as we've talked about on this podcast, where the prophets will be privy suddenly to decision making going on in the heavenly realm,
Yes.
with regard to what's going to happen in ancient Israel, right? Or among the nations generally. In this case, what we find here, and I think that's what's really interesting to start off here in Job, is that we have members of the council that are coming to present themselves. It's interesting too. We also have in Job the reference to the host of heaven that were there rejoicing before creation. And many scholars will look to that as God's divine counsel rejoicing at what God was about to do with regard to creation itself. Yeah. Giving proclamation and praise to the great creator, to the Lord, the supreme God who creates everything. Yeah, he is the one who's created the host. He's the one who's created the council. He's the one who is about to create all of creation. We have that actually here in Job, which still gives us this sense that what we have in this text is something that is, to me, it has a sense of early time within Near Eastern thinking and thought with regard to reflection of the way the world is and the way the divine council is. So that's it in a nutshell. The divine council is essentially the bureaucratic system of heaven, but don't just think of any bureaucratic system that you have in mind, right? So there's a real parsing out of this that has to happen.
Yeah, and it's always fascinating when we get a peek, behind the veil to see what is going on
Yeah.
in this divine council. And the divine council, I think, shows up more often than people might think. One interesting example people might be surprised to think about is Isaiah chapter 6,
Yeah.
where we see Isaiah, who has an encounter with the Lord, and we have these divine beings worshiping the Lord, these seraphim, or the seraphim, as you probably hear them called, singing holy, holy, holy. But there's a really key line a little bit later. We have Isaiah, who is experiencing God, overwhelmed by this experience. He's confronted with his own sin and the sin of the people, saying, behold, I'm a man of unclean lips amongst a people of unclean lips. And then he is purified in some sense, because one of the divine beings brings over this fiery coal that he puts on his tongue. But then in verse 8, there's this interesting verbiage here. And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send, and who will go for us?
Go ahead and read it in Hebrew. This would be,
Okay, so we'll start in Hebrew first. Vashma et kol Adonai. And I heard the voice of the Lord.
Good.
Omer, sorry, I heard the voice of the Lord saying,
Mhm.
Et mi eshlach, who
Mhm.
will I send?
Yeah.
Umi yelech lanu, and who will go for us?
Good.
Lanu, for
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
Va'omar hineni, shlacheni. And I said, here I am, send me. So this is interesting because God doesn't just say, who will I send? He also says, who will go for us?
Yeah.
And so this is again is this idea of God speaking. It's not just Isaiah and God here, but also the divine counsel is here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's not like God is just, it's like God and Isaiah and God's talking like Isaiah isn't
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
and it's just like, okay, hey, I'm like literally
Yeah.
right here. But
We
we've already
w
been introduced to divine beings in this chapter.
Mhm.
So it's only
Mhm.
safe to assume he's speaking to divine beings in his divine
Yeah.
counsel.
We also have this with Genesis 1. Let us make man in our image, right? And let us make him in our likeness. There's a lot of questions there with regard to
Mhm.
why the plurality, right?
Sure.
Is it referring to God as Trinity, for example, in a Christian perspective,
Mhm.
which obviously we're not going to have that debate here. But at this instance in 6:8 of Isaiah, it's obvious that it's not speaking of Trinity because why would he say who will go for whom shall I send? Or who will go for us. That's
Yeah.
um there's a clear difference between the singular and then the plural
Yep.
here. It's not
Yep.
referring to God at all. So
Correct. And the
yeah,
divine beings are also very clearly already present
that's
too.
right.
So
Yeah.
narratively, that's
Yes.
straightforward.
Those winged serpents flying around, those seraphim. Yeah. So
So then guess what? Who also is a part of this divine council in this scene is Isaiah.
it's right.
And
Very
this
good.
is a great example of how prophets uh they play a part in this in the divine council. And then Isaiah, he says, "Yes, send me, I will go." And he's the one who takes on this great mission
Yeah.
for the rest of his life.
So essentially, then, what you're suggesting is that the prophet is also on the divine council, as we've said many times, right?
Yes, I
Yeah.
I think again, I think Isaiah 6 is a great chapter that it's pretty straightforward. I think
Yeah.
it's hard to see it another way.
Yeah. So, in that sense, then, we can suggest that with the divine counsel, that obviously Yahweh has members in the divine realm who are part of his bureaucratic system, right? And
Yep.
they have certain roles, they have certain offices, they have certain tasks that they are commanded to do
Mhm.
to carry out for him. And this is interesting. What's interesting about this on the just for thinking about the unseen realm, give our tagline to the late Professor Dr. Michael Heiser there, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that if we think about the idea of worship and service as being connected with avad throughout
Yeah.
Exodus, for example, we have it in early Genesis narratives, then we see clearly that to worship the Lord is to really be in service for him. And you see that in the heavenly realm as much as you see it in the earthly realm as well, don't you?
True.
Yeah. It's all
True.
over the place.
Again, Isaiah 6 I think is a great example that that what happens in this encounter. First, he's overwhelmed by the way that the presence of the Lord is depicted, but then it's by the sound of divine beings clearly worshiping the Lord.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what flows
Yeah.
from this is the mission of the Lord
Yeah.
that requires action
That's
on
right.
behalf of other people. And so
Yeah.
you have this praise and this action of obedience in service to the Lord that Isaiah takes on.
That's
So
right.
yeah,
Good.
I think it's a great point
Yeah,
that you bring
very
up.
good. And to all of our listeners, we have our Hebrew Bible book club, which you can join us on Patreon, where you can come and actually join Mati and I in a live reading of the text of the Hebrew Bible, where it's not scripted, where we haven't really planned anything out. We just read, we talk, and we discuss. You can ask questions and join us live on Patreon.